I've recently been talking about hacks and gadgets for overcoming premature ejaculation. So I wanted to touch on something a bit different today, something a little bit more on the psychological side of things. Trauma. So that's negative, sometimes scary sexual experiences, and that can be quite a common cause of sexual difficulties. So for men, these difficulties include arousal and erection problems, and ejaculation issues, premature or early ejaculation, or finding it difficult to reach orgasm. Now, sometimes with such a problem, we can get hooked up on the mechanics of sex. What's the guy doing wrong, or what's the couple doing wrong? And we don't think about the potential effect of any sexual trauma, the bad thing that might have happened years ago, way back in the past. Maybe we know about it, but we discount it or don't realise the negative effect that it might still be having. So let me give you an example. And this is a true story about a client that I worked with. And thanks to him for giving me permission to share. John, for we shall call him John, he was in his late 40s. He was married, he had a good career, and he was happy enough with life. But he'd always found it difficult to make sexual intercourse last. And he tried a lot of the practical things. He tried sprays and things like that. He had been trying to stay relaxed. They tried different positions. Now his wife was supportive and they'd kind of made the best of things, but they both felt that their sex life could be better. Now John said that he found it difficult to experiment and really try working on lasting longer. Because when it came to anything sexual, he felt a kind of discomfort mixed in with his arousal. He felt like he went into a mode, like a default state. This happened before and during sex, and he just felt on edge, really unsettled around sex. He loved his wife and he found her attractive, so it worried him that he'd always felt like this. He didn't understand it. Now, we talked about his previous relationships. We talked about his early sexual experiences and things like that. And this feeling and the premature ejaculation problem had always been there as long as he could remember. And then, kind of just as an aside, he mentioned a story from when he was 12 years old. So he had a friend who lived a few doors down, and this other boy was a bit older. This kid was around 14 or 15. And they were at this older boy's house one afternoon, and the parents were out. And the older boy had this video that he wanted to show John. Now we're talking 1980s, and it was a pornographic VHS video that this boy had got hold of somehow. And it was quite hardcore by the sound of it. And John had never seen porn before. He was only 12. He was quite innocent about these things. But John wanted to play it cool, and he wanted to keep up with the older boy. So they drew the curtains, he agreed to watch it, and they sat on the sofa and they played this video. And in fact, John said that the older boy was eating ice cream while he watched it. So he'd clearly seen some of this stuff before. Now, what followed was an uncomfortable, excruciating, but kind of grimly fascinating 90 minutes for John. And he stuck it out. They watched the whole thing. And he remembers watching the most vivid bits almost through his fingers. He felt hot, clammy. He didn't want to be there, but he sort of found it compelling too. He wished it would end. He wished it was over, but it was kind of exciting too. It felt really illicit and out there. Now, it does sound like this video was more than just vanilla porn. So that's quite a heavy introduction to sex. In fact, the other kid's ice cream, that might have been the only vanilla thing at all on that life-changing afternoon. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to call that life-changing. Just talking about it after all these years made John feel that squirming and that shame. And he didn't tell anyone about it back then either. He went home and his mum made him his dinner. So he said he feels a bit sick and he can still feel that rush at the same time, that excitement at seeing things that he was never going to unsee. Now, he doesn't have flashbacks or nightmares about this, at least not now anyway. And he's clearly still affected by the experience. He has an emotional response to the memory and to things that pattern match to that experience today. Sex with his wife, for example. So John, he doesn't have PTSD, but he has a negative emotional affect. That's trauma. It wasn't a life or death thing, of course, but it was intense, scary, conflicted, and totally unexpected. One minute he's hanging out with his mate, and next he's on this 1980s roller coaster ride of pornography. So his natural instinct was to go home, but it was overridden by his other natural instinct to hold on to his status, to be seen as cool. And his natural curiosity, that would have played a part in this too. And he probably had more questions than answers by the time this experience was over. It was not an ideal sexual education, shall we say. Now, as with all traumatic experiences, big and small, some programming of his feelings took place in that moment. He had a freeze response. And when he came to see me, it felt like this programming was still hanging around and it was getting in the way of his sex life now. He said that just thinking about sex gave him this kind of familiar, uncomfortable feeling, excitement, attraction, disgust, shame, cringe. He was feeling it all. And he said, I find it difficult to feel like a sexual person. Other men seem to have sex, enjoy watching porn, and take it all in their stride. So it makes him feel different. So no wonder he was finding it difficult to be in a relaxed, creative, and connected groove during sex with his wife. He's pattern matching to all this stuff. It's a survival instinct at an emotional level. Sex is exciting and bad and scary, so says his emotional memory. I worked with John on dealing with this trauma, this experience when he was 12, and it didn't really take that much therapy to shift it. Now, there are various different ways of working with trauma, talking it through, EMDR therapy, and the technique that I tend to use is called the rewind technique. Now, I could do a whole series of videos on that, but suffice to say that the rewind technique is a modern, brief, quick intervention that reprocesses the memory, the bad parts of the experience, in a less emotionally charged way. Now, this approach, it doesn't try to change what happened, it doesn't remove the memory or anything like that, but it settles the emotional feelings around it. And it can take just one session, and it's used for all kinds of traumas. So PTSD, near-death experiences, accidents, and things like childhood bullying or bad relationships or bad sexual experiences too. And you can search for the Dr. Muss MUSS rewind technique, and you'll see lots of videos and resources if you're curious to find out more about it. So John and I rewound the trauma, and John let this percolate for a couple of days, and he slept on it, and he felt different. If he thought about that day, watching that video with the other kid, it felt different. It felt more in the past emotionally. Now, did he immediately last longer in bed and feel more confident overnight? No, it's just not how this works. But along with feeling different, he was able to feel more relaxed and resourceful just in himself. And then with his wife, he continued to try out the different positions and taking things more slowly, and he was able to let himself be sexual. And actually, in the space of a few weeks, there was a significant difference in their sexual communication and John's ability to take the initiative sexually. Everything started to feel a bit easier. He didn't feel himself going into that old mode during sex. So there we go. Tackling the trauma had a positive domino effect. It freed up John to actually do the things that he'd struggled with before. Now, in John's story, porn was the traumatising thing, and his young and impressionable mind watching it. But it might not have been porn. It could have been something else he'd seen, or it could have been a negative interaction with a girl, or sex shaming from a parent, or whatever. So I'm not making the case here that porn is all bad and terrible and traumatising, but porn, especially the stronger stuff, it can have this negative effect. And I've spoken with grown, experienced men who told me that they've seen something more extreme, maybe by accident on a tube site or something, and they felt that flinch. I wish I hadn't seen that. And they're probably just fine. But what if they've been 12 years old? Now, there's an argument that, yes, porn is everywhere now, and maybe 12-year-old John would be less sensitive, or this, hey, let's watch this together scenario would never have happened. Kids do have their laptops in their bedrooms from a much younger age now. Or maybe it means there's more potential for young people to be traumatised by the things they see online. And they're even less likely to talk about it because porn is everywhere now. So either way, I think one takeaway from this is talk with your kids. Help them to know that yes, porn is real sex, but it's not real world sex. And your kids can always talk with you about anything they've seen or worried about. And if you've seen stuff that made you feel uncomfortable, or has maybe stuck with you in some way, well, there's no harm in talking to someone about it. And if you relate to John's story in any way, it can be quite easily treated and the experience set properly in the past for you emotionally. Now, for John, could he have overcome his premature ejaculation without doing this rewind work? What if he'd never talked about it on that day? Well, yeah, potentially, with a bit more persistence anyway. Past trauma does let go and things get better over time, completely naturally and organically. But sometimes it's a slow process, 30 odd years in John's case, and we're able to give that process a little bit of an extra nudge forwards in therapy. Was this porn experience the sole cause of John's sexual difficulties? Maybe, maybe not. We don't really need to know. But it wasn't helping. And a treatment on this occasion, plus some sexual skill building, was all it really took in the end. I hope this had some insights, and thank you for watching. If you have any questions about premature ejaculation or sexual confidence in general, please feel free to get in touch, and my website is linked in the description below. And you'll find lots more advice in my Bang on Time self-help course, which teaches the essential skills for managing your sexual excitement and enjoying sex for longer. And there's a link to that in the description too, guaranteed. Also remember that I'm a therapist sharing my opinions and general advice, but this is no substitute for going to see your own GP or doctor. So if you have any concerns about health or your sexual health, you should go and get a medical checkup and take some advice. Thank you very much for watching.